David, do you want to introduce our speaker for today?
Sure, it'd be my pleasure. It's our pleasure for our inaugural speaker for 2021 to introduce Carole Ann Barth. Carole Ann manages tree conservation program at Prince George's County Department of the Environment. The program she manages seek to engage residents in tree planting and care and to increase tree canopy, especially in underserved communities. Previously, Carole Ann worked in the field of watershed assessment and restoration planning, as well as environmental site design. She co-developed the nationally recognized Rainbows Terrain Gardens program. So with that, I pass the mic to Carole Ann.
Hi, it's so great to see you all today, and I do really enjoy this group, so I'm happy to be presenting. I don't know that I will be sharing expertise today, but I guess I'm sharing a strategy because we often, we're lucky in Prince George's County in terms of having a fairly good county tree canopy, but we have a lot of urban areas with very low tree canopy. And so we are often working in communities that maybe have not had well-maintained trees or have not had trees. And so we don't always have a receptive audience in terms of people who are already jumping up and down and ready for trees. So what I'm going to share with you today is one of our strategies for kind of getting groups warmed up to the notion. Just a quick look here, we do have programs for planting all natives in schoolyards, in public areas. We have 2 programs dealing with trees on private lands, one through grant funding and one through individual rebates. And then we provide a lot of demonstrations and workshops. So we have a lot to do. Just point out at the bottom here, one of my favorite quotes from Wangari Maathai. Y'all can read it for yourselves, but I really do believe that. All right, so a little background too, in that the average child in America can correctly identify 1,000 corporate logos, but cannot identify 10 plants or animals that literally live in their backyard. That statistic about breaks my heart, but it's one of the reasons that we also try to introduce not just why natives are important ecologically, but how they bring us meaning in terms of where we're from. So I would normally talk to an audience and say, well, if I see plants like this, I know I'm in the Sonoran Desert. I want to go get an Indian taco. If I see plants like this, I'm in the Pacific Northwest. I'm going to gaze in awe at these giant trees, then go find a nice winery. If I see trees like this, I am on vacation and somebody's going to bring me a fresh banana daiquiri. But if I see pitcher plants and sweet bay magnolia and some other plants, I'm in a magnolia bog, a globally rare ecosystem that has only ever existed in Washington, D.C., Montgomery, Prince George's County, and Fairfax County, Virginia. So I try to impart that when we learn about our natives, our trees, we're learning a lot about basically where we come from. And part of that is understanding trees in a cultural context. How have they been important historically? So we're going to take a very quick run at that and talk about some of the traditional roles, everything from tool use to symbolism and mythology. It's just a little bit of a sideways approach to the topic. Of course, Native Americans, most of us are familiar with this concept of building. Can y'all see my mouse? Give me a thumbs up if you can see when I do that. Okay, excellent. We often think of the wood and bark homes were small like this. But what we don't realize is that the ceremonial longhouses were at least 100 feet long. And in some cases, in large villages, you would actually have structures that could seat hundreds of people. So there's a interesting technology there, and also large boat building. So, the Europeans really invent this kind of technology of using wood for these purposes. And in fact, back before you could go and buy tools, people grew them. For 8,000 years, people have been growing plows by shaping the way the tree grows. And it is still in use in places today. There's, in fact, a tradition, now this is not local, this is India, but actually creating living bridges and ladders from tree roots. Some of these are almost 200 feet in span. There's some double-decker ones. There's a village that has created bleachers for watching soccer. And with proper tending, these structures can last for 500 years. So just a little bit of a different approach. So this is our first question. I hope that you will all answer in the chat. Which tree flowers when the shadfish migrate upriver? In this crowd, I think everybody's going to know it. So are we getting any guesses in the chat? And Kinsey's going to have to help me because the chat will.
Yes, we have someone says shadbush. Someone says serviceberry, amelanchier, another shadbush.
All right. You are both absolutely right. That's how the shadbush got its name. The serviceberry name comes because it would bloom in the mountains at about the time that the preacher would come around and do services for all the people who had died over the winter when the ground was frozen and you couldn't bury them. So that's how we get the name for this lovely tree. So there's a deep history with Chesapeake watermen using that phenology to time their efforts. Black locust trees tell you that blue crabs are shedding. So it's a time to go out and get your soft crabs. Black locust blossoms are also very, very tasty if you haven't tried them. Flowering dogwoods, the rockfish are spawning. When the dogwoods bloom, the stripers loom. Now moving on to farming, the next question. When dogwood leaves are the size of a squirrel's ears, it's time to plant what? This goes back a long way as well, but it's actually one that I was raised with. Do we have any guesses, Kinsey?
Yes, someone says peas, a couple people say corn.
Corn it is, although it might work for peas too, I don't know. A lot of phenology that farmers have relied on. Oak trees and elm leaves, same thing for corn. Dogwoods for planting your tomatoes, shadbush for your potatoes. And of course, you also use these cues to see when the pests are coming up. So it's a very rich history. We look back to Native Americans' use of these materials. We look back to the colonists. We look at the African-American watermen. Trees are inextricably woven into our culture and into our history. As marker trees, as witness trees, and especially in this region, we have trees associated with the Underground Railroad. So marker trees were used to point to landmarks, to mark trails. You see a very typical form here where when it was young, they staked the tree down so it would grow in that direction. Put that bend in. When I was a kid, I took a maple branch and formed it into a circle. So it grew into a crown. So I could be like the queen of the woods when I was a little kid. Again, these are things that were very useful that we maybe don't always think about. But there are groups now that are mapping these marker trees that still exist and finding the trails. It's a question, were some of these trading routes, were they something ceremonial? We don't always know. Trees in the Underground Railroad. Hollow trees, of course, would be a place where you could maybe hole up for the night. Water and food would be stored in there for fleeing slaves. During the day, when you couldn't follow the stars to find north, not always true, but old saying about the moss on the north side of the tree would be utilized. And in fact, there is a tree, a landmark tree along the route that Harriet Tubman took and where she ferried her family and other folks. If you've not heard about it, there is a wonderful new Harriet Tubman Museum in Maryland now. And there are also portions of the trail. In fact, just this past year, a group of people walked that whole trail as a remembrance. In Atkins Arboretum, you can also see part of the trail there and the kinds of trees and such that, you know, they had to move through. So we have quite a few witness trees in this area. Oxon Hill has a willow oak since the War of 1812. From those of you who are not from the DC area, we have a series of hillsides and kind of cascading hills. So when you get to a nice hill, you can often see the Capitol. You can look down on the district. And in this case, this property overlooked DC, and that tree was there when the British burned the Capitol. Something we're all remembering these days right now. If you come to our area, you go to Mount Vernon, you can see trees that George Washington himself planted. You can walk up and you can touch those trees. Now, there are some that we have lost, like the Liberty Tree. It stood until 1999, but it was one of the places where the revolution was plotted in Annapolis. All right, so that's a little peek at trees in history. I think this is great, particularly when you're working with kids, because it allows them kind of a tactile thing. Just even talking about the age of a good mature tree, and the fact that they can stand there and they can talk it and touch it, and it gives them an expansion across time and an idea of how tree time works. All right, so we're going to move on now to medicine. Which tree helps reduce inflammation and pain? And let's see, I'll rely again on Kinsey to tell me what the chat says.
We have people saying willow, salix.
Absolutely right. I knew this group would know it. There's actually quite a few others as well. There are a wealth of trees as well as other native plants that have been used medicinally. A lot of times as environmentalists, we talk about why we need to save the rainforest. And one of the reasons is because there are all these potential medicines. But we often overlook that we have a lot of resources in our own backyards, and a lot of our native flora has a long history and is now being examined for actual use today. And of course, we always put in the warning, don't just run out and start doing stuff. Willow, we've already talked about, has the salicylic acid, tree used for a variety of purposes. Alder, this is one I hadn't known about, for inflammation and itching, fever. Hawthorn, you know, nowadays they're saying that all of the berries are superfoods, and hawthorn is actually kind of in that category as well. We don't usually eat the berries as they are. They usually get made into syrup or jelly, but it has a lot of the same functions as the blueberry with blood pressure. Birch, not just for yummy soft drinks and birch beer, but actually can be valuable for you. Very high in vitamin C. Looking now at reducing tumor growth, anti-cancer, anti-inflammatory benefits. Poplar. Now, this one is a little odd to me because they talk about the buds being used, and I don't know about where you all are, but I typically find it hard to find a poplar bud that you can actually reach because they tend to be up the tops of mature trees. But if you get one, you can use it. And if not, the leaves, wounds, burns, and inflammation. One of my favorite examples, and I love to talk about this one, is sweet gum. It's a beautiful, gorgeous tree. It historically had interesting uses in Mesoamerica. It was actually used for a drink the Aztec kings would drink, as well as medicinal purposes. And now it's being studied for a lot of different medical uses. It is kind of fun to me that it does contain a precursor to the active ingredient in flu medication, in the Tamiflu. But it's antibacterial, antioxidant, anticonvulsant, anti-inflammatory, antifungal, and it's turning out that it's not just a slight effect, but in many cases it's very powerful. So this is undoubtedly going to be leading to new medicines in years to come. And, you know, here this is, it's around us, it's fairly common. Maybe we will look at it in a slightly different way now. And the list goes on. You know, we could do a whole talk about this. You know, there's a wonderful reference that you can go up, and I forgot to bring it today, but I will send it to the group, where a researcher at USDA, an ethnobotanist, has examined many of these traditional cures and paired them with the chemical components of those plants and how those chemical components are currently used in modern medicine. Very fascinating if you're interested in this kind of stuff. All right, we are zooming right along. Lastly, again, I said trees were inextricably linked in our cultures. And just a quick example of that. The white pine is the peace tree of the Iroquois Confederacy. It was under the white pine that the tribes agreed to work together to become a confederacy, to no longer fight. And in fact, the Articles of the Confederacy, the way it worked, was one of the formative resources for our own Constitution. So just a fun thing to mention today on Inauguration Day. And of course, as Europeans came to this country, they brought their symbolism and their myths with them. In Norse mythology, Yggdrasil is an eternal green ash tree binding all the worlds together. One of my favorite parts about this myth is there is an eagle that lives in the top of the tree and a dragon that lives among the roots. And there is a squirrel that eternally runs up and down the tree, causing trouble, telling the eagle, you know what the dragon just said about you. He's been talking smack about you. And then he runs down to the dragon and says, well, you won't believe what the eagle just said about you. And so it's one of the trickster figures, that little squirrel running up and down. And I just love that. In Celtic mythology, we have the hazelnut of knowledge. And many stories about that as the hazelnut fell, the salmon, which was in Celtic mythology, the first animal, ate the net and attained all knowledge, all knowing, and became the salmon of wisdom. And in fact, the legend of Cuchulainn, who cooked one of those salmon and got a little bit of the juice on his finger because the salmon burned, put his finger in his mouth, and thereby again became all-knowing. So most of us are familiar, of course, with this mythology and symbolism as the pagan practice of bringing in evergreen boughs for the winter solstice became adopted by Christianity and became known as the Christmas tree. So purposefully, this is kept to be a pretty short talk because it's something that we like to use to just ease folks into talking more specifically about trees and what we're trying to do and what we can offer with trees. The other piece that we often do, and the one that will sometimes get the audience into the door, is to talk about the pet peeves. What are your issues with trees? You know, what are your problems? Where do you need help? And this is not so much a talk as it's an open session. And we just have a few slides prepared so that as the questions come up, we can turn to things. If people have, they've had to deal with somebody else's improper planning of putting a tree too close, or they're not themselves aware of what the distancing should be, so we can discuss about that. Say that if we properly place the tree, it's not going to threaten your infrastructure. We can talk about the right tree for the right place that we all of us deal with. But again, if you have people that are living in a neighborhood where this was not done and the trees have not been maintained, and they have not maybe been there to get the 50 years of benefit the tree caused, but now they have to take the tree down and the pavement's buckled, you know, you need to deal with that. And you need to talk about who the different players are so they know when they have issues that a tree does need to be cleared from the lines, or they have had the tree butchered. And they want to know who did that, or even just who planted that tree in front of my house. I get lots of calls about that. So it's also an opportunity to let people know who to talk about, to explain why, if they have a tree that they perceive as being too big, we don't want them to top it, what the problems with that are. And of course, we offer more in-depth education. We offer workshops on how to prune properly, how to have maintenance that's less work, how to correctly plant trees, how to select trees. We often do these in partnership with a municipality. We have a lot of municipalities in Prince George's County. Many of them are in the Sustainable Maryland program, and they have green teams. So that's fabulous. We work a lot with the green teams. And then, of course, we also provide these resources for homeowner associations and civic associations to work together. We also go through, I mean, if this were a workshop, we would, of course, have handouts, files, of course, today as we're doing it virtually, so that folks have references that they can use that are helpful to them. We also give them resources on where to go to find tree professionals, explain to them about the Maryland Tree Expert Law and how people have to be registered for that, not just the random person who shows up at your door. We point them towards the certified arborists, and we point them, of course, towards the Chesapeake Bay Landscape Professional Certification Program for the certified folks. And we found this approach to be very successful. It's also important because it's a very different thing for me to come in as somebody who is not from the community, as an outsider, and to say, I want to sell you trees. To have those partnerships and to have the opportunity for folks to tell us what their issues are, to see what help we can provide, even if it is just information, and to grapple with the issues that they're grappling with. And we also, of course, talk about the benefits of trees that most folks aren't aware of. We explain how communities with fewer trees have higher rates of childhood asthma, and how trees are not a nice to have, they're a have to have. Talk about heat islands and just the whole environmental justice component of trees. And that's what we have also done in targeting our county tree programs. We did overlays of areas with the lowest canopy, obviously, highest impervious surfaces, highest pollution loadings in the local streams, and a whole variety of socioeconomic factors, income. And after overlaying all of those, we found, as you might expect, that a lot of our inner beltway, older, underserved, predominantly minority communities are the ones with the greatest need for trees. So we run countywide programs, they're open to all. It's important that we work with communities that are early adopters and ready to go, because we can plant a lot of trees, but it's also important that we make an extra effort and we focus on these areas of greatest need. So I wanted to offer this, like I said, not because I thought I was going to teach you anything, but just because we found this to be kind of an effective communication strategy, and to just see if you all have similar things that you would like to share with us, because I know this is a fabulous group for learning from. So that's what I was going to present. And we're good for questions.
Carole, and thank you so much. Really beautiful work you've done to imagine trees as more than just objects, but as ways to place us and connect us to ourselves and to Mother Earth. So appreciate all the work. It's really impressive, and I hope you can share some of those resources with the group, some of the links, and I think we can also, if you feel comfortable, share out the slide deck you prepared.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So happy to open it up. We have plenty of time for questions. We covered a lot in a really concise and wonderful presentation, and either drop your question in the chat or raise your hand or just speak out.
Question. I find the phenology stuff really interesting. Do you know of any resources, any books that kind of list that all in a compiled place?
I don't have a single resource for that, but there are some very good websites. And actually, one of the things I'm very excited about is I'm starting a new program where the communities and schools that get trees from us, we're going to set up a local phenology program on one of the existing national websites, so that they can report when their tree leaves, when it flowers, et cetera. And also it's a bit of a social media thing where they can communicate with other folks, and that data becomes available to national climate scientists that are verifying models. And it'll help us learn about how our trees are responding in the changing climate, because the big fear is that a lot of these links will become disjunct. So anyway, I'm very excited about that program and trying to get that off the ground now. And I have about 100 people in the town of Hyattsville that have signed up to do this.
So I'll just speak that in Boston, the Arnold Arboretum had a program like that just wrapped up called Tree Keepers. And they were doing all the phenology stuff only on site, but they were doing all types of interesting training. And then someone here asked a question. Sorry, my
Yeah, I want to
chat.
speak up. I actually
Yeah.
helped fund that program at the Arnold Arboretum, and so
Oh.
I'm excited to hear that you're doing the National Phenology Network program too. I got to visit their offices in Tucson, Arizona when I was working on that program, and they're just such a great group of people helping coordinate that citizen science data. It's really cool.
Is there a
Yeah,
link you could drop in the window there for us?
Sure, sure, I can drop a link.
That'd be great. Thank you.
I think for our program, we're going to go with, I mean, we're going to be using the Phenology Network because they're a fabulous source of information. But I think we're actually going to be using iNaturalist.
Oh, cool.
And part of the rationale for that is that it's easier. Well, it gives them the functionality of being able to identify plants so that they can also say, what's this weird bug on my tree? And should I worry?
The Nature's Notebook thing is a little bit limited because you have to like set up your tour essentially for groups like that. And it's a little bit harder for people to like submit observations on something random else that they encounter. So that's cool.
And we're also going to be, we're developing a tree app and database that will be part of our documenting of tree health over time. And so we'll be able to export the observations that folks put in and add that to our geodatabase.
How long have you been using this, the pet peeves and legends and lore kind of template? And how do you distribute that information? Do you hold meetings in communities? Do people come to you?
We've been using it, I guess, in various forms. It's evolved over time, but we've been using it since probably 2018. And usually it's either we go to a community or we, like I said, often partner. So like we've partnered with College Park, one of the municipalities, for example, and folks, come there. So, and like everybody else, we're pivoting and trying to figure out how to do this effectively virtually. And someday I will learn to give a presentation virtually that doesn't suck, but I'm not there yet.
I think this one was quite good.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
This was lovely.
Excuse me. It's hard not to move around and to engage the audience by eye. So I feel that keenly.
I think the quiz questions that you have were interesting and engaging. I definitely learned a lot there.
Well, that's another way that we've actually used this information. And we ask other questions like walking in trees reduces your stress level by in what time period? And it'll be like a multiple choice, like a half hour, 10 minutes, 5 minutes. And a lot of these questions we not only use in presentations, but we have like a poster board. And so when we did events in person back in the day, we would take that. And so if I'm working at a farmer's market with the table, or if I'm, going to an Earth Day event or something, that's something that we would hold up and have people answer the questions. Or I actually even printed a bunch of questions on leaf cutouts. So then I could hold them and there's a question on one side and then they can turn it over and see the answer. And then we make all these available to the organizations and communities that we partner with. We're very deeply connected with the Green School program. And so teachers and the youth green leaders will take these materials and print them out and use them at their own school. Or this isn't a tree example, but with our pet waste game, we had a group of high school future farmer group in a food desert community. They learned our spiel and our game, and then they took it to an elementary school in their community for an Earth Day event.
This is actually getting me to think about one of the ways that UEC might be a convener of material that's out there, because this is not only the first time I've heard of your work, but I'm really intrigued by the material you have. And perhaps, there's a way for us to think about a platform or a space where we could share resources, because I imagine these are tools, especially for us in the Northeast, that would be translatable to our local environments. So, you've just sparked an idea in my brain, and I assume that there are people out there who might have material that they're also feel comfortable sharing. Because why reinvent the wheel if there's already amazing stuff out there?
I'll be happy to steal from all y'all.
Exactly. Well, maybe there's a way for us, Kinsey, to think about that on our website. Please don't visit our website because there are lots of 404 pages and misdirections. But in the coming months, we hope to redevelop it, and maybe there's a way for us to link out to or incorporate other people's work. Other questions for Carole Ann? We have another 10, 15 minutes left on the clock.
Yes, I have a question.
Yes, Teddy.
Thank you, Carole Ann, for your presentation. I have sort of a two-part question. One is just a general, do you have any recommendations for sources of information related to Indigenous communities and how they still either related or still relate today with plants, particularly with trees, and also being just letting you know I'm in the Maryland area as well, in Baltimore, Maryland. So there may be some similar tribal land there. And the second question is more about hosting events. I've been thinking about this more recently as I attend. There's still a few, actually, we're having some in-person events. Stewardship, we did a tree care MLK Day on Monday, and there's a quick briefing, a little explanation of, we had to do some advocacy here. Hands-on volunteers is just one aspect of it, but just perhaps your thoughts on how might we offer a land acknowledgement, just the, whether we are of Indigenous, if we have knowledge of our own Indigenous background or not, perhaps just a simple statement that says, we're standing on the land of blank today, and just sort of to kind of provide that context before any work is even done. I'm learning about this cultures in Hawaii that they have these, it's more of in a form of a ritual, but they actually ask permission and they greet the land before they begin doing this work. And so I wonder how in our Western American culture we can perhaps begin to adapt those sort of practices and setting intentions and providing that context before a work day with volunteers or these sort of things, without becoming political, just perhaps kind of stating that. Do you have any thoughts on that, or have you seen any organizations doing that kind of work?
I think that's wonderful. And I have a lot of ideas, but one thing that I have used, and not just necessarily for trees, but actually for some environmental events. And I'll send a link to this. It's the Great Prayer of Thanksgiving. Now, I am fortunate. I went to college in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and while I was there, I was able to take Oneida language and actually work with a native speaker at the Oneida Reservation. And it was a wonderful experience. And that's a tribe that was originally in the Northeast and got pushed westward. But as part of that confederacy, there's the great poem of Thanksgiving, or prayer of Thanksgiving, and it goes through all of the parts of the environment. And so, trees, of course, are a big part of that. And it talks about, in very, very concisely in the English translation of, we call on the trees, and we thank our tree brothers for, what they provide. And then the refrain with all of it is, and now we are one. So it's like we're one with the fish, we're one with the trees, we're one with the sky. It's very moving. But there are tribal maps online. So that's one thing that you can get a sense of who was there. It is a challenge to uncover this history because so much of it has been, swept under the rug or not recorded. But there are still active tribes in our area. There's a Piscataway Museum, the Piscataway people. We're especially fortunate in DC because we have the Native American Museum on the mall. It has an entire floor which is dedicated to the mythologies and creation mythologies of the different peoples of the America, and you can just go around. And they have a very good bookstore, and they have some books as well. So that's probably a good place to start. And then even if you can't get there physically, I'm sure there's a lot of stuff online. And just go to some of there's a pretty active Native American news service. There's some resources, and I'll plug some of those in. And there are often local events and powwows, and that's another thing that you can come and participate in and make those connections. And I definitely want to follow up with Teddy because there's a lot of awesome tree programs in Baltimore that we're trying to learn from. And I think we can share a lot of good stuff.
Thank you.
Thinking about land acknowledgements, I was at the Partners Conference this year. I think probably many of you were, and I think it was the final speaker gave a land acknowledgement at the beginning of his presentation. So as a group, maybe that's something we could think about doing. Like when I'm giving educational presentations out here, say, the land of the Monongahela culture or wherever. So I think that's a great point.
Yeah, like a question to the group, like what qualifies us to give a land acknowledgement, or perhaps there is no qualification needed other than just us being confident that, the tribes that we're acknowledging, the people that walked and tended the land, we're acknowledging that from our local resources. But beyond that, like, is a qualification needed? Just sort of something. I'm sorry, I missed that thing at the Partners.
It was cool. I can look up the speaker's name and send it to you, Teddy.
I believe, Teddy, that's all recorded. So I think it's probably archived somewhere.
Yeah.
Cool.
And I think sometimes, particularly when we're dealing with kids, it doesn't have to be that detailed. I think sometimes just talking about that there are these traditional uses. You know, like when we have the elementary school kids every year when we do Arbor Day, you know, we tell them as they're firming the soil, they're putting the tree, they're tucking the tree into bed, you know, and sometimes we have them sing a lullaby. You know, it's just kind of bringing in that dimension in some way, shape, or form. I mean, kids get so excited. Like if you plant a blueberry bush and then you say, you know, there's blueberries over there too, right? You know, in that woodland. You know, talk about bayberry, and you know that's another one of my quiz questions. You know, what tree did the shrub did the colonists use to make candles? You know, and a kid gets very excited about, you know, I planted a candle bush. It just, I think any of the cultural connections help us kind of just short circuit to people's feelings. And that's what I think is so joyful about this work. So yes, I know we want to be careful and not being engaging in cultural appropriation, but I think we can do a lot in this direction to just, you know, a lot of times I will tell kids to think of the biggest tree they've ever seen in their whole entire life. And then to realize that they've only seen like a third of the tree because they've not seen the roots, or to say, look at that tree over there. How far do you think those roots extend? To me, that's experiential as much as digging the hole and planting the tree. And my other thing is that of all the kids' activities I've ever done, trees or anything else, I find that all of those activities work equally well with adults. You know, maybe you change the language a little bit.
Well, I want to, yeah, go ahead, Teddy.
Yeah, I think it's really great and important to just provide that context, whether working with children, adults. It's almost like acknowledging the land itself before, you know, the work that's being done. I really appreciate thoughts and tips, and I look forward to connecting with you, Carole.
Yeah, and when a lot of times I'm dealing with kids that don't know that you have to take the plant out of the pot, or they don't know that a plant will come back the next year, you know, because they're so disconnected. So, you know, when I tell them to spank the pot and tickle the roots and pull it out, I usually say, can you feel how much better the plant feels now? It just doesn't, oh, it feels so much better now. And, you know, I don't know. I mean, I'm an ecologist by training. Maybe I'm just naturally a woo-woo kind of person, but I find that it works.
Well, clearly it does, and it resonated with me and hopefully with you, the work you do. I wanted to thank you, Caroline, once again, and we'll be in touch and hopefully be able to share out your resources and this presentation today. I wanted to thank everyone for joining. Kinsey, any wise departing words?
I don't know about wise. No, I don't really have anything. This is being recorded and will be uploaded. So I'll send it out with the next batch of UEC emails.
And we appreciate everyone joining. Thank you once again, Carole Ann. And I just wanted to acknowledge the Wisconsin force in you runs strong. I love Green Bay. And I miss Wisconsin myself, but there's Yeah, I think there's something in that landscape that I experienced when I was out there, the Leopold sort of aesthetic to thinking about how we approach our shared nature together. So I want to appreciate you all. I want to appreciate our trees. I want to appreciate our guest speaker, and we'll see you in a month.